Okay, I think we are getting there. Just sorry about that. Bear with me. We'll eventually get there. I'm trying to see if people can see us. Good. Okay, brilliant. We are now live on YouTube. Many apologies for the delays. Somehow YouTube wasn't accepting my keys to enter. So thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for waiting for us. And we are going to get started with this session today. So first of all, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining us from all over the world. My name is Diana Souza, and I'm a lecturer at the UCL Institute of Education. And today I will be chairing this roundtable, which has the objective of debating perspectives, pathways, and realities in different countries, particularly exploring the notion of moving towards a unified early childhood education. I am joined by a fantastic group of guests in this conversation, and I invite you as the audience to add your comments and questions in the live chat on YouTube, as I will include these in the conversation. So first things first, what brings us here today and why? This event is organized by the Civic Movement of Education from Birth to 3 Years Old in Portugal, which is a movement of early years professionals, researchers, parents, and teachers, which emerged almost a year ago because it was felt for the first time in a long period that the COVID-19 pandemic provided an opening in public opinion to discuss issues related to the education of young children, particularly focused on the fundamental role of creche in the functioning of the Portuguese society. So we are talking about a group of people, of professionals working in diverse areas of early childhood education, who came together with the purpose of creating a movement to encourage the participation not only of the educational sector, but also of the society in issues related to the unification of early childhood education from birth to 6. So the aim was really to encourage important political and social changes in response to disparities that have been identified in this education sector, and by supporting relevant initiatives already in existence and by acting as an informal sharing of research and information as an accessible platform for opening spaces for dialogue and reflection that can motivate positive changes in education and in society, particularly within this sector and within the education from birth to 3. So it is important to note, first of all, that this initiative, throughout its around 11 months of existence, has received the support of individuals and organizations which are significant to this cause. For example, the UNESCO National Commission that has fully endorsed the movement's purposes. So really, we are talking about a collective group of individuals who want to provide spaces for critical awareness, conscientization, dialogue, and transformative change in this sector. So without further ado, I will begin by introducing the panel, and then each speaker will have about 10 minutes to explain the different backgrounds and views, and then we will engage in dialogue with input from your own views and questions, which you can keep adding on to the live chat. So I'm going to attempt another feat at the platform that we are using today to see if I can share with you my screen, which is going to be another interesting moment for us today, I guess, after waiting for a few minutes to get started. So I'm joining now the call, and I will share with you my screen. So in our roundtable today, we have, first of all, we have Professor Peter Moss. Peter Moss is an emeritus professor at UCL Institute of Education. His interests include early childhood education and care, the workforce in children's services, the relationship between care, gender, and employment, and social pedagogy. Much of his work over the last 25 years has been cross-national, in particular in Europe. In his work on unifying early childhood education includes a report for UNESCO written with John Bennett and Yoshi Kaga, Caring and Learning Together, a cross-national study of integration of early childhood care and education within education, and two studies in 2000, 2002, and 2018 of the integration of early childhood and other children's services into education in England, Scotland, and Sweden. Next, I introduce you to Professor Carmen Daly, which I hope will still join us today. Carmen is Professor of Early Childhood Studies at Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, where she teaches early childhood policy, teacher professionalism, and infants and toddlers pedagogy. She regularly participates in policy-making fora in New Zealand and other jurisdictions, including her native Malta. Most recently, Carmen chaired the Ministerial Advisory Group that developed the 10 years early learning strategy plan between 2019 and 2029 in New Zealand, which was launched in December 2019. Carmen co-edits with Professor Jane White the Springer book series Policy and Pedagogy with under 3-year-olds, Cross-Disciplinary Insights and Innovations. She also co-edited with Professors Linda Miller, Claire Cameron, and Nancy Barber, Sage Handbook of Early Childhood Policy, published in 2018. We also have here today with us Professor Tullia Musatti. Tullia is a senior associate at the Institute of Cognitive Sciences and Technologies at the National Research Council of Italy. Her research interests are in children's cognitive and social processes in early childhood education and care. Tullia has collaborated with Italian public administrations in numerous projects and early childhood education and care reorganization and evaluation. She is now a member of the Committee for the Integrated System of Education and Instruction from birth to 6 years at the Italian Ministry of Education. From Catalonia, we have preschool teacher Noemí Ramírez Fernández. Noemí is a preschool teacher. She has worked in Catalonia for more than 25 years as a preschool teacher and director of a municipal school. Over the last decade, she has advised schools and trained preschool teachers in Catalonia, Spain, and Latin America. She's also a member of the Rosa Sensat Teacher Association, as well as of the editorial board of the magazine Infancia and the Pickler Working Group. Their main goal is to improve the early childhood education system in the country. And finally, we have the president of the Association of Childhood Education Professionals, APEI, in Portugal, Luís Alberto Ribeiro. Luís has a degree in preschool education and 2 postgraduate degrees in school administration. With his vast experience in school directorates, in 2009, by appointment of the Minister of Education, he joined the Scientific Council for Teacher Evaluation, where he remained until its extinction. He's a founding member of the Portuguese Forum on Educational Administration, and since 2018 or 2016 rather, Luís has been president of the Association of Childhood Education Professionals, director of the 4-month publication Cadernos de Educação de Infância, Childhood Education Notebooks. He's a member of the editorial board of the magazine Children in Europe Today, and also integrates several national and international projects in childhood education. So as you can see, we have a very stimulating and diverse group of people coming together today in dialogue. And I will now give the word to Professor Peter Moss. Peter, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, and hello to you all from London. I'm really pleased to be participating in this important event. For many years, the subject moving towards a unified early childhood education has seemed to me to be, in the words of Michel Foucault, very urgent, very difficult, and entirely possible. Entirely possible, yet not happening, or at least only slowly and very partially. So we need to restate its importance, its urgency. We need to understand why it has proved very difficult, and we need to demonstrate that it is entirely possible. I want to talk today about the limited progress towards a unified early childhood education in England. So I'm not covering Northern Ireland or Scotland or Wales, the other three countries in the United Kingdom, each of which has responsibility for its own early childhood education. A bit of history. 1997 was a turning point for early childhood education in England when Tony Blair's Labour government came to power and made early childhood a priority after decades of government neglect. The situation then in 1997 was really bad, including an early childhood system split between each under different ministries, education and health. Fragmented and divisive services for young children, no entitlement to early childhood services, no right to attend, a large, low status childcare workforce, plus a relatively small number of graduate teachers, low public spending on early childhood, and last but not least, a weak parenting leave system, not integrated with early childhood education. And I want to argue the importance of unifying parenting leave with the system of early childhood education. After 1997, with early childhood now a policy priority, there were significant developments. First of all, the integration of policy responsibility for all early childhood services into one ministry, and that was the Ministry of Education. Secondly, the integration of regulation for all early childhood services from 0 to school starting age, with all these early childhood services now inspected by Ofsted, the National Education Inspectorate. There was the introduction of a 0 to 5 curriculum, what is called the early years foundation stage. Public spending increased, services expanded, and an entitlement was introduced to free part-time early education for 3- and 4-year-olds. In other words, 3- and 4-year-olds achieved a legal right to attend early childhood education. A new early childhood service was established, integrated, multi-purpose and community-based children's centres, each serving its own catchment area, and 3,500 of these centres were opened in less than 10 years, an amazing achievement. And also we got new parenting leaves, but paternity leave and parental leave were introduced, reflecting the government's support for employed parents. So, in terms of moving towards a unified early childhood education, what did this all add up to? As Diana has mentioned in her introduction to me, in 2010, together with Yoshi Kaga and John Bennett, I helped produce a report for UNESCO called Caring and Learning Together, which is subtitled, it's back to front on your screen, a cross-national study of integration of early childhood care and education in education. So it's a study of the possibility of integrating care and education in an integrated early childhood education system. And it features 6 countries in particular, including Sweden, New Zealand, and Brazil. And if you want to find it, you can download it free if you Google Caring, Learning Together and UNESCO. And in that report, we identified 7 criteria for a fully integrated or unified early childhood education. We said if those 7 criteria are met, then you have a fully unified system. Between 1997 and 2010, the English government moved to meet 2 of those 7 criteria. Government responsibility was brought together into one ministry, and regulation, including curriculum, was integrated into one system. These were, so to speak, the low-hanging fruit, the relatively easy bits, and little or no progress was made on the other 5 harder criteria. So let me just tell you what happened to those. On access, in a fully integrated system, you would have a universal entitlement for children from 0 to 5 or 6 whenever school starts. In England, a universal entitlement was limited to 3 and 4-year-olds and to part-time attendance. There have been subsequent measures to widen access, but these have been conditional and not universal. So access to free education for 2-year-olds is limited to children from low-income families, and access to longer hours for 3 and 4-year-olds is limited to children with working parents. On funding, funding remains completely split and has in fact got even more so. So public funding for the education entitlement for 3 and 4-year-olds is money paid directly to services, but public funding for childcare is paid to parents. On the workforce, again, no change. England still has a deeply divided workforce with this relatively small group of graduate teachers in schools and a very large number of low qualified and very badly paid childcare workers in nurseries. When it comes to type of provision, services have remained hopelessly fragmented. Children's centres, this integrated, universal, multi-purpose service, these centres were introduced, but instead of becoming the uniform service throughout the country, they were simply added on to the existing chaos of different types of services. So we just got more confusion and not more unification. And the final criteria was what we called in our report conceptual. There has been no movement in England to adopt and embed an integrative and holistic concept of early childhood education that encompasses education, care, and parental support. Instead, policymakers and politicians and the media and parents continually talk about childcare services, childcare workers, childcare costs, blah, blah, blah. For example, this extension of free provision for 3 and 4-year-olds from 15 to 30 hours was no longer presented as an educational entitlement for all children. Instead, it was advertised as free 30 hours childcare for employed parents. So, why has the move to a unified early childhood education stopped, and been only partial? I can offer a few suggestions in conclusion. First, I think there's been a profound lack of political understanding and commitment. successive governments of left and right have simply not understood the importance of a unified system, and therefore have lacked the necessary political commitment to back this transformation. And such understanding and strong commitment is absolutely essential when you're moving from the easy bits, from the one ministry, from the one system of regulation, to the hard and also very expensive bits. Universal access from 0 to 5, one system of funding, a workforce based around a graduate early childhood teacher or educator, and one unified system of provision. That is the difficult and the expensive bit, and you need very strong understanding and commitment to move that forward. And one reason why we haven't had that is that we have had no strong and unified campaign for a unified early childhood education. We have fragmented services, and that means fragmented interest groups, all focused on their own particular service, their own particular interest. Now, many of these interest groups actually want to maintain the status quo, including a very large for-profit childcare sector providing private nurseries for employed parents, and whose business model assumes a low-paid, low-status childcare workforce. Moving towards a unified early childhood education involves, in my view, moving towards a universal public system and a well-qualified and paid graduate workforce, with no place for a separate childcare for working parents system provided in nurseries run as businesses. So I want to suggest that a unified system is a public system, and it runs head on into a neoliberal approach which emphasizes the market and privatization. And as a final point, and I say this with particular sadness, I would note that England has shown an unwillingness to question, reflect, and discuss its early childhood system. There has been no review of our system. We just carry on without thinking about it. There has been no evaluation of our divided system, and we've shown no official interest in those countries that have moved to unify their early childhood education. We have taken a bad situation and without reflection made it steadily worse. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for these very insightful reflections, and also to point towards directions and possibilities, and also for the reasons why the system operates in the way it does. So thank you very much for that. On that line, I would pass the word now to Tullia to tell us a little bit of some of the movement that has happened in Italy, which perhaps may be a contrast to the realities in England. Tullia.
Yes, good evening to everybody. Well, until very recently, the early educational provision in Italy has been a very much split system. But in 2017, 4 years ago, finally we obtained a national act which established an integrated system of education and instruction from birth to 6 years. I'm saying finally because this act was the result of a long struggle of the Associació Gruppo Nazionale di Infanzia, together with the best quality educational experience realized in the country. However, the integration of educational services for under 3s, the needy, and the scuole dell'infanzia for children from 3 to 6, the integration into a unitary system is a working process more than a reality. I'd better say it's a roadmap that is to be followed tenaciously and patiently in order to overcome the present gap between the two segments of the early childhood education provision. The main differences concern the percentage of children catered, the qualification, the governance, the accessibility, and the pedagogical culture of the two segments. Difference number 1, the quantity of places. The provision of under 3 mostly consists of needy and caters for 25.5% of under 3s. This percentage of children increases by age and reaches almost 47% for 2-year-old children. Most important, the percentage of provision are dramatically different between northern and central regions. The small number of needy in the southern area favors the anticipatory access of 25 or 2-year-olds into Scuola dell'Infanzia, where they are received together with older children and in conditions that are not appropriate for their age. At 3, 90% of children access the Scuola dell'Infanzia. At 4, there are already the 94% of Italian children. Most Scuole dell'Infanzia are full-time from 8 to 4, and children receive a meal inside the school. But we find inequalities between regions, northern, central, and southern region, also with regard to school time, as in the southern area, 10% of schools are open only during the morning, and children do not eat at school. Difference number 2, the governance. The roles of state, regional governments, and municipalities are quite different in the two segments. Services for under 3s are regulated by regions and are provided by local governments, municipality, directly or in collaboration of private initiative, mostly cooperative. The first sector, I don't know if you can see it in English. Municipalities receive small financial support from regions and only recently from national government. Municipalities have the responsibility of both controlling private services and of promoting the quality of all the public and private services in the area. Quite a different scenario for children from 3 to 6. 2/3 of them are accepted in schools provided by the Minister of Education. Most of the other children are received in private schools operated by an association of Catholic schools, and only about 10% in schools provided by local governments. The municipal provision is particularly important in big cities, as in Rome, Milan, Turin, Bologna, but also in Reggio Emilia, Pistoia, Parma, where a continuous investment of the local government created solid pedagogical practices. No state schools receive some financial support from the national government. Difference number 3, access. Under 3-year-olds may access services according to parents' working status, mother's employment is valued specially, and family status, and fees vary according to parents' income. Children with disability have access priority, as well as children from particular difficult socioeconomic environments. Yet parent fees cover 20% of service costs on a national scale. Recently, a widespread political pressures demands to lower or suppress parent fees with a big national investment. In Scuole dell'Infanzia, parents pay no fees. They pay just for meals and bus transportation. Difference number 4, qualification of personnel. All the services for under 3s are operated by educators who care for children. One educator cares for 1 to 10 children according to age and to local regulation. And then there are also assistant cleaners who clean the facilities, furniture, and so on. they do not care for children. The new law has established that that educators are required for under 3s are required to have a 3 years university degree in early childhood education, BA. In scuole dell'infanzia, 1 or 2 teachers care for 20 to 26 children and do not provide physical care to them. The qualification required in this case is a 5 years university degree in another faculty, not the same. It's called Scienze della Formazione Primaria, Primary Education Sciences, which allows them to work also in primary school and is more oriented to specific didactics of language, mathematics, and so on. The presence of a pedagogical coordinator who supports educators and teachers in their reflection and practices is required in neither scuole dell'infanzia run by municipalities or private initiative in order to receive public financial support. Unfortunately, the professional role of pedagogical coordinator does not exist in scuole dell'infanzia run by the Minister of Education, the major part. Difference number 5, pedagogy. In service for under 3, an original pedagogical culture emerged over the years, as well as in scuole dell'infanzia run by local governments. This culture is focused on children's well-being and the development of their cognitive and social potentialities, more than on their learning achievements. State scuole dell'infanzia are more oriented to support children's learning experiences. In sum, you can easily imagine the cultural and political tension that exists between the two segments of a split system. The new law has outlined some strategies to overpass difficulties and identified some organizational pivots to establish I don't know how it can, to establish a relation. The Act outlines a new articulated framework of governance of the system. Governance shared between state, regional governments, and municipalities. Regional and local governments keep the important function in regulating, promoting, and providing service for under 3s. But the new Act assigns new tasks also to the Minister of Education in supporting the extension of these services, providing in-service training, and regulating the relation with the 3 to 6 segment. The Act has also created a committee for the integration of a system, 0 to 6 at the Minister of Education. It is composed by experts from the academic world and by representatives for regional and local government as function of consultation and proposal to the Minister. The committee has recently issued a document, Pedagogical Outlines for the Integrated System 0 to 6, that is now submitted to discussion in public debates all over the country. The document outlines the goal and scope for the creation of an integrated system with a clear reference to documents issued by the European Union, the quality framework, and the recommendation of the EU Council in 2019. And it identifies some major strategies to implement the system integration and qualification that I will now describe very briefly. First, municipalities are required to create a local network of pedagogical coordination in their area. This network will involve all pedagogical coordinators of all services, both public and private for under 3s, and of scuole dell'infanzia, both public and private, operate in the area. The pedagogical coordination network will promote reciprocal knowing and cooperation between educators for 0-3 and teachers of scuole dell'infanzia. And it will plan shared initiative to guarantee a good transition of children from one to the other institution. Point 2, another important strategy is the realization of shared initiative for continuous professional development for personnel of the two segments. This is considered to be an important lever of integration of pedagogical reflection, exchange of good practices, and also elaboration of educational strategies for ensure the transition of children experience and free. And then the institution of Polo per l'Infanzia, that is a specific programs that will provide one or more service for 0-3 and one scuola dell'infanzia in the same building or nearby. The rationale is that this would allow to share organizational resources and to promote continuity in children access, relationship with parents, and children experience. And they might constitute a sort of meeting point for early childhood in the area and help to build a relation with the local community. In the plan that will be proposed by Italy within the next generation EU fund, the extension and qualification of educational service for early childhood, mainly for children under 3, is important, should be. It's not finished yet. It should be an important point. There is a great expectation to receive financial resources on it. If it will be true, it will be most important to spend these resources within a qualified integration between the two segments of educational provision from birth to 6. As Peter Moss just said, in order to achieve such integration, there is a need of a strong political commitment. Still for the next years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tullia. I think we can all see now the different points that are overlapping between the different systems, which are going to generate a rich discussion, I am sure. So I would pass now the word to Noemí. Noemí, the floor is yours.
Yes. Wait a second. Okay. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm very grateful to be here and sharing this time. First of all, I want to sharing with us with this situation in Spain. Spain is divided into states, and each of them has their own independent autonomy, which drives up own law in early childhood education. I will talk about early childhood education in Catalonia, which is the community to which I am from. The government of the Generalitat has exclusive competence that includes choosing the educational contents on the first cycle, defining the teaching staff and their qualifications, inspection, internal evaluation, innovation, research, and educational experimentation to assess and guarantee the quality of the education system. The early childhood education in Catalonia include children from 0 to 6 years of age. They are divided in 6 courses, and these are split into 2 cycles. From 0 to 3 years first cycle, from 3-6 years second cycle. In 2012, the Department of Education prepared guidance documents for the development of the curriculum in early childhood education. These documents are complementary, and their objective will be to share reflections, pedagogical reflections, and advices about education from 0 to 6 years. In Catalonia, there are other educational services dedicated to early childhood from 0 to 3 years. There are family care services, and we have family space where families can share space and time The curriculum framework acknowledges the unity of early childhood education, but the reality is that it's fragmented in 2 cycles. The first cycle is in independent schools called Escolas Bressol, and the second cycle is integrated into primary schools with children up to 12 years of age. Early childhood education is not compulsory in Spain. The 0-3 cycle is taught in public schools. We have also public schools with private management and private school. While the 3-6 cycle has public, private schools aided with funding and private schools. In all cycles, we have some places that are reserved for children with special educational needs. The class ratios are very high and the staff is quite limited. You have to think that we have, for example, in the first cycle, the 0-3 years, we have split in 3 groups. The first group, from 0 to 12 months, we have 2 babies for only 1 educator or teacher. And in the second classroom, from 1 year to 2 years, we have 13 children. And from 2 to 3 years, we have 20 children. We have 1 educator for every group, and every 3 groups we have an assistant for help all us. And the second cycle, 3-6 years, the ratios is 25 children for each class, but there are situations that can reach up to 28 children. The working conditions in the first cycle are diverse and vary according to the city councils. Often better conditions is in the big cities are seen. Salaries are usually low, and most professionals do not have time to prepare or have pedagogical reflections. For the first cycle, the required degree is technical, or that is not a university degree, or degree in early childhood education. And in the second cycle, the conditions are determined by the public administration of each autonomy. It is access through an entrance test. The working conditions of private schools, professionals have their own collective labor agreement. Catalonia has a long history in pedagogical renovation, have a very good professionals, pedagogues, and the little ones' learning process is raised from a global perspective. Early childhood educators stand out for their rigorousness, for educational and training quality. They are the group that is most educated in the education system. However, we have very few financial aids from the town councils and the government of the Generalitat. 0-3 schools have high fees. So it is expensive. It is expensive and class-based. Only about 50% of children of this age attend these centers. And 3-6 cycles is universal and free. Almost 100% of children of this age go to school. No less, it is a challenge to be able to respect the personal arrangements of each child. Due to the amount of children there are in one class, they usually share a space with the primary school. Children are set based on their personal development after careful observation and evaluation. In Catalonia, we have had Rosa Sensat Teachers Association since 1965, which has been in operation for 56 years. The association organizes various training activities and is committed to the permanent training of teachers. The association has organized a teacher summer school for more than 50 years, which brings together hundreds of professionals every year. The association organizes autumn and winter school also. In 1981, the childhood magazine of the association was published for the first time, in which we can find pedagogical content on a stage 0-6 years of age. There are also other magazines. We have Infancia Española, that is Spanish Infancia, that recollects a lot of articles about different experiences around all of Spain. We have Infancia Latinoamericana and we have Infancia Europea. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Noemí, and thank you for reinforcing the role of organizations such as Rosa Sensat in the continuous professional development of teachers. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that soon. And now I would pass the word on to Luís Ribeiro. Luís, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Diana. Thank you for the invitation. I want to greet my colleagues of this round table. Well, first of all, as I said to Diana weeks ago, English is not my natural foreign language, so it's much more easy to me speak in French or even in Spanish, but it's okay. I do my best. I think it's important, my approach to the early childhood education, it's a political approach. I think it's important we understand all five and all the participants a little bit about the historical context of early childhood education in Portugal, because I think it's very important, because we have a large improvement in the last years, but we have for so many years a terrible history in the early childhood education, in education in general. So when Portugal became a republic in the beginning of the 20th century, in the 1910, 3/4 of the population cannot read or write. In the middle of the 30s, the initial training of the kindergarten teachers were finished, was stopped, and only re-begin, I don't know how to say it, but only start again after only in 81. So in the 60s, for example, in the 1960, the half of the population only study for until the fourth grade. So it's in fact our starting point when we talk about early childhood education. Our starting point really it's only in the 80s. In the 80s, there is when they began the initial training for the kindergarten teachers at the university. It's in 86 is the first basic law of education. We included the preschool education from 3 to 6 years old. And in 1907, there is a major transformation, a major improvement, the way the politics look for the early childhood education, because there was created a basic framework law about the preschool education, was created the first pedagogical guidelines for kindergarten teachers, and was created like a movement, you know. So it's a major conscience, a social consciousness about the importance of the education in the early years. When I talk early years in the 90s, I'm only talk about the 3 to 6 years old, talking about preschool education. There is another change in the 19th, very important in my opinion, because maybe the most important, because Portugal, it was one of the first, maybe the first, I don't know, really don't know, but one of the first countries in all the world to give the very high training, very high qualification in the initial training for the kindergarten teachers. Because since 1907, all the kindergarten teachers in Portugal have a master's degree. So I see the 7 in the international classification. So it's a very high training, and it's by law. It's all the kindergarten schools and centers from 0 to 3. They need to have kindergarten teachers with this higher qualification. So it's a very, very strong movement at that time. It's a very, what we call a very strong starting point at the 19th. So when we arrive to the 31st century, we have the split system. We have the preschool system, and was supervised by the Ministry of Education, and you have the 0 to 3 non-education system outside of the basic law of education, and are supervised by the Ministry of Labor. So it's quite different, the approach and the way this supervision occur in the preschool or in the 0 to 3. So when we arrive to the 21st century, the coverage rate for the children from 0 to 3, it's around 20%. Now it's around 52%. It's when we compare these numbers with other countries, a very high coverage rate. But for labor reasons, Peter Moss refers someone's about the UK. For labor reasons, it's a lower coverage rate, because all the families, all the parents and mothers work in Portugal. They work a lot of hours in Portugal, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So they stay outside their home. They need to put the children in these centers from 0 to 3. The coverage rate from the preschool, it's around 100%. So it's a large improvement in 40 years, since the beginning of the 80s until now. But in the 0 to 3, it's very dramatic, because many of the parents need to put the children in center. There are no centers available for so many children, so they need to put the children many times in nannies. In nannies in Portugal, it's a terrible solution, because they have very low qualifications. We talk about 4th grade, 6th grade, or 9th grade. Many of them are illegal nannies. So it's a terrible solution. So what we try to improve since 2016, because we have a dilemma. For one end, we have a very high coverage rate from the preschool education, with the more or less 55% from public kindergarten schools. The kindergarten schools in Portugal are connected to the primary schools and to the secondary schools and the elementary schools. They're working like a cluster. They're working in a network. So they really a tight connection between the primary school and the kindergarten teachers and the preschool teachers in the public schools, in the public system. And the others 45% are more or less for, I think, 20% from the private institutions, and 25% with what we call semi-private institutions, the solidarity institutions, are private institutions who work with public funds. So in 2016, we have a problem, because we know about what the research say about the importance of the education in early childhood, in the early childhood years. And we need to do something. And APEI, at that time, in 2016, create a petition, a public petition, and we delivered this petition a month ago in the Parliament, and this petition was accepted. The petition needs to change the basic law, to include the 0 to 3 in the basic law of education. because the supervision made by the Labor Ministry in the 03, it's a non-education supervision. So it's the teachers, the kindergarten teachers who work in these centers, they work without any kind of guidelines, pedagogical guidelines. So in our understanding, it's a very terrible situation. So this petition, we try to, with this petition, change the situation, change the basic law, because when we change the basic law of education, we force the government to promote public policies about early childhood education. And I think I have high expectation with this petition, because all the political parties have something in their programs about the early childhood education. And I have several meetings with them, and I think we have right now good conditions, I think favorable conditions to change the basic law. And we try to do another kind of strategies through APEI. Every week we begin to promote seminars all over the country. These seminars are, we create a network with the research centers and with the kindergarten teachers. And we promote, since 2016 until now, almost every week in all the regions in Portugal, seminars about early childhood education. We call to these seminars being baby seminars. And in these seminars, we have several researchers who work in the research centers in Portugal, connected to the universities or the polytechnic institutes. And the other end, we have also kindergarten teachers, professionals who have a very high quality work with their children at their centers. So we create this kind of network connected to the seminars and to the professional development. It is something important, because every week we have a kind of discussion, a kind of sharing about this kind of knowledge, professional knowledge, and the other end, it's kind of research knowledge, because most of the time these two separated worlds. What happened in the university is quite different what happened in the schools, in the kindergarten centers. So we try to create like an interface between these two separated worlds. And right now we have also very close contacts with the Secretary of State of Education to create pedagogical guidelines to the 03. And this is the situation actually. I think maybe in the next year, it's possible to have a change of the basic law of education. And I think when this occurs, this is a very a new starting point to look for the quality in the early childhood education.
Thank you so much, Luís, for sharing all of the initiatives that have been happening in the Portuguese context in this regard. And thank you all for everything you've shared. I'm sure I've missed quite a few things, but I think what's very clear is that this is not a straightforward issue. It's quite complex and it has many dimensions. And in this conversation today, we've highlighted issues of governance with centralized and decentralized governments, issues related to service provision, whether it's public, private, charity-based, issues of access, of who is included, and as a consequence, who is excluded as a result of that. Issues of funding in terms of local, national, and private entities. Many of you spoke about the qualified workforce and also the disparities that exist within the sector. When we talk about 06 as unified, we can see that there are discrepancies sometimes between the 03 and 06 pedagogues and educators who work with young children. You spoke about issues of pedagogy, issues of parental leave, and I think one very pointed issue as well is the question about responsibility, the understanding and commitment of political entities, and the willingness to do something. And to start off with a difficult question, where do we start? So if we have all of these components, all of these things, what is the beginning? And we are having this conversation as a critical way of engaging with these issues and these questions. And one of the things I thought it was interesting also because I work in the English context was what Professor Peter Moss mentioned as the unwillingness to question and reflect that we encounter sometimes in the sector. So my question to you, my question to the panel, where do we start when we think about the unification of 06? Peter.
Well, I'm inclined to say that that in a way it's difficult to start without a degree of political understanding and commitment. And I think if I look at the countries that I think have made really interesting progress, one of them is Sweden, and it's very interesting that their unification originates from a very extensive commission which operated for 2 or 3 years way back in the early 1970s, where there was enormous attention given to understanding what they had, what they wanted to change, etc. For example, that they needed to move from having a split system of kindergarten and daycare centres into a unified preschool with a unified workforce. I mean, they worked through all these things. And if Carmen had been here, I think she would have said the same for New Zealand. In the 1980s, they had, again, a working groups which brought together really people who would then have been the basis for the future development, because they had very similar understanding of what needed to be done. So I think in a way it's important to start from a realistic understanding of the problems in the split system, a clearer understanding of why it's important to move to unification or integration. And also, I think, a clear understanding of what it means to be unified. That's where I would keep coming back to saying there are certain criteria, and I think you need to hold those criteria in mind on there. So that seems to me is a degree of commitment and understanding, an ability to review and reflect, ability to look at other countries without copying them, but to learn from them. And then being able to decide what are going to be the steps in a long process, because you don't change, you don't change systems which have been going for 100 years overnight. But you do have to change them ultimately. I would finally say, I think the fact you've emphasized early childhood education is crucial, because it seems to me that a unified system is an educational system, which means to me why you really have to say goodbye to talking about daycare and childcare and all this stuff. You understand that education is relevant, it is supportive of working parents. You know, that's not an issue. It's not very interesting. You just accept it, as Loris Malaguzzi did in Reggio Emilia. He said, you know, we have to adapt to the fact that our parents are working. So, okay, having done that, let's get on and do the interesting pedagogical work. So it has to be an educational system. If you look at Sweden now, 0 to 6 is the first stage of education. Their preschools are legally schools. Their workforce are teachers, and the heads of the preschools are principals, equivalents of schools. So it has to be, I think, understood as an educational, a project of education, which in turn raises the question of what is education. Because many people understandably are very concerned that they don't want compulsory education pushed down. So I think it actually opens up a whole incredibly important political project about the future of education. I think it's enough to be going on with.
Thank you. Anyone would like to comment on that? Luís, go for it.
Okay. No, it's I agree with Peter Moss. Yes, but it's always a political decision. So that's why we try to understand what is the best way to change the things, to change the status quo. Because in Portugal in 1997, when was created this kind of framework law about preschool, there is like a clivage. I don't know if the word exists in English, clivage. Okay, there is a well, a split. There is something broken at that time because the Ministry of Labor stopped to supervise the preschool education, and this because until that time, this kind of supervision in the private and semi-private kindergartens are made by the Labor Ministry. So it was an enormous change because they lose this kind of supervision, and since that time until now, it's the Ministry of Education who supervise the pedagogical and the educational perspective in the preschool. So since that time, 25 years ago until now, there is the Ministry of Labor lose their specialized professionals. They don't have at their board, at the Ministry of Labor, they don't have professionals, qualified professionals, to make any kind of pedagogical supervision. So there is an empty hole, you know, there is an empty space right now in Portugal, because there is high qualification kindergarten teachers in the 0 to 3, but there is no kind of pedagogical supervision. So what we understand when we made the petition, it's this context. So how can we change this? Is this always a political decision? Because change a basic law, it's always a political decision. So we try to convince, first of all, make, like I told you, make a kind of wave, a kind of movement to unify all the kindergarten teachers for the same, what we try to achieve is the understanding of the education start when the children be born, not at 3 years old. And we have all the recommendations from the European Union, from the OECD, from the National Education Council, and so on. So we have the research, we know everything. It's agree about the education start when the children was born. So this kind of movement, and then on the other end, we take some advantage with. It's a little paradoxical, but it's true with the pandemic situation. It was the first time with the pandemic situation in Portugal. It was the first time I remember there is a large discussion about the importance of the education in the early in the early years, because the first centers to open, it was the schools from the centers from 0 to 3 in Portugal in May last year. So for the first time, the parents, the kindergarten teachers, and in the whole society, of a large discussion about the importance of education in the first years. So I think right now, because there is this kind of empty hole, and there is I think a large consciousness about the importance of the education of early years, about the parents have this kind of conscience, and the media, it's the same. So I think it's another way to change the things outside the system, you know, not from an agreement like Sweden, because it's most interesting, like occurred in Portugal with the preschool education in the 19th. I think it's another way to change the things. A private institution with whoever work very closely to the board of the Ministry of Education, we changed the things. We tried to change the things from outside. So, okay, we forced the parliament to have discussions about the early childhood education. And then we expect this made some changes, but it's another way. But it's always in, doesn't matter if it's in Portugal or Sweden or wherever, it's always a political decision.
Thank you, Luís. I would like to invite Noemí in. You are muted.
I agree with all the things that you are telling, but I want to talk as teacher. I think that in Catalonia, for example, all the teachers have very clear that the unification of this cycle of the 0-6. I think that it's a political problem that I cannot analyze it so much because I'm not political people, you know. But sometimes I'm asking myself, under which view we are building these schools, these systems, because finally we want, if we don't stop to speak about childhood, about which image we have about the kids, we continue in the same way. And to me, this is very important, no? And I only want to say this in this moment because I feel that sometimes we don't evaluate so much the education in the early childhood because we cannot stop to think about what does it mean to be a child, what does it mean to be in this age, you know.
Thank you, Noemí. You raised a very, very important point. The image of the child, the image of educator, the purpose of early childhood education are all of the political questions that you, Peter, tend to talk about in much of your writing. So definitely central to the discussion here. Tullia, could I ask you, thinking about the progress and the development of the integration system in Italy, do you think in Italy you are closer to an answer to the question of what it means to be a unified system, given all of the changes that you've been going through?
Well, I want just to say something before answering your question. You just said about what is the main point, the level for progress and qualification of all the system. I think that the idea of a right to education of children, right to education, to early education, is a very strong one, and I think that it's a very strong one because it speaks to parents, it speaks to the whole family of children, it speaks to teachers. A teacher in Scuola dell'Infanzia, a teachers of all the children, when they have to cope with this idea, they have to think about it. They cannot deny the right to education of younger children. They have to reflect on it. So I think it's a very powerful idea. But I'd say also that maybe it's also what said Peter, but actually we have not very clear ideas about what it is the right to education. Certainly it's not the right to early learning. It's something else. It's something very vague. This vagueness is at the same time a strength and a feeble, I would say, the contrary of strength. Because really we don't know exactly what it is, but it is a very powerful idea. to say that even a very, very young child from birth has a right to education. What does it mean? I think that everybody has professional contacts or non-professional contacts with children nowadays cannot answer they don't have this right to education, a newborn. We feel that it has. So I think that the fact that the services for 3 years and as well as the schools for 3 to 6 have also a strong commitment in supporting mothers' employment. It is still an important fact, but it does not hide what is the real problem. The consciousness that is emerging in modern society that young children have a right to something that we can call education, that means freedom, liberty to develop their potentiality in something else. And all this, so okay, I forgot your question. Diane, I'm sorry.
No, I thank you. I think you've addressed the question, which was really about trying to think about what it means to be unified. And I think we are reaching the point where we are asking the question. So it's no longer about the answers. We've identified some of the issues, and now we are starting to question, to put on the table, what is it that we need to ask in order to take this movement forward? How can we move towards a unified early childhood education? What questions we need to ask, and who is part of that process? Who are the stakeholders there? And I think it's interesting because sometimes there are questions about the almost like the complementarity between parental leave and early childhood education services, and also what constitutes an early childhood education service, and also the levels of responsibility from the family and from the state, and what does that represent to the offer of a public education system, as many of you referred. And I was wondering, Noemí, I'm curious about the regional tensions between the local government, for example, in Catalonia, and the central government in Spain. Do you have any sort of strategies, any ways of engaging in conversation with political identities and entities in order to think about how you offer education in Catalonia?
I cannot answer very well this question. I explain why, because you are asking me for the situation between Catalonia and Spain. I think that really I cannot answer this question in the sense that I don't know exactly how affected in the early childhood school, because we have we can't create it. We can mix our law, and then for the moment we don't have any repercussion in this. We don't have any problem. I think that the problem that the teachers now is they are I don't know what they say. The big problem in this moment is the ratios and the situation that we have, not the situation between Spain and Catalonia.
Thank you. I was thinking about the tensions and implications for your policies in Catalonia. I actually have Michel van der Broek. He's listening in, and he has made a comment before about how this could be a good prelude for a larger webinar, including policymakers. So hopefully we can think about that in the future, because this is definitely a conversation worth having. And Michelle is saying it is a thin line between right to education and the lowering of the age of compulsory education, as early learning targeting children believed to be at risk. And this perhaps is something that we tend to see quite often in Anglo-Saxon countries, or particularly in England, where we see the lowering of compulsory education coming through. And Michelle is saying, I live in a country with a strong neoliberal and meritocratic discourse. In such a context, the unification of 06 could have severe counterproductive effects. The question of what it means to be unified is important, as is the question of what education is for. So I think that's a good summary of many of the things that we've been discussing here today. Peter, I could see you looking at me when I mentioned the lowering of compulsory. You are on mute now. Oh, you're still on mute. Let's.
Is that better? Yeah.
Good.
Because I come from a country that should be a terrible warning to people who want to see that, because children in England start primary school at 4, and compulsory school age is 5, but most are in at 4, and it means that primary school has an extremely powerful influence on a very weak early childhood sector. So I have got quite concerned when I hear countries which start children at compulsory school at 6, which is very common in Europe, discussing reducing the compulsory school age. It seems to be a very bad idea. And of course, in some countries, early childhood education has been made compulsory, or at least 1 or 2 years of it. Hungary is a country that comes to mind, where I think certainly the last year of kindergarten and possibly the last 2 years of kindergarten are now compulsory. And I think that was extremely problematic. I think when there are good services, then the vast majority of parents will choose to use them for their children. And if you make them compulsory, then actually you remove from early childhood education the need to actually be responsive to children and parents, because they have to attend. So I think it's something that should be resisted very strongly. It's also part of the whole process of schoolification, as it's called, sort of pressing down of primary schooling into early childhood education. So on the one hand, I think that early childhood education should be a universal right, and indeed it is, according to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think we should remember that. It's been made very clear that that the right to education begins at birth. And as I say, I think it should be a universal right from there, but I would not want to see it made compulsory. I think that would be the wrong direction to go. And I think it's also unnecessary if you actually have a responsive system.
Thank you, Peter. And Maria Antonia Castel is saying, understanding a school project life growth during the first 6 years of a child is essential. So it's really that idea that we can look at education as a project as well. So this attempt to start answering that question of what is education and what are early childhood education systems for. It's an interesting point. Unfortunately, okay, Luís.
No, so thank you. Just to say something, because I think the Portuguese experience is interesting, because we have almost all the children in preschool from 3 to 6 years old, and it's not a compulsory school. So it's an option for the parents, but it's quite different when the parents know there is not a compulsory school, and the children stay there, and the way the politics made the educative politics for the preschool, it's quite different when this is not a compulsory school. What I think it's and we as APEI, we try to invest in the next years, it's the try to change the primary schools. The UK problem, it's not the same problem in Portugal. In Portugal, the primary schools are left alone. There is no kind of politics because it's about our history and our terrible history in all the 20th century. So they left alone. So the primary schools are many times more connected to the elementary schools and to the secondary schools, but they share the same you could say process, because there is the same one teacher for one class. And the major difference when we talk about education is when we change this, when the children or the student pass through a teacher and a class for several teachers. This is the major changes in the school education. So in Portugal, it's very important. For example, we can, in the opposite process that occur in the UK, we colonize the primary schools. So I think it's possible the primary teachers begin to work more closely with the kindergarten teachers, not to colonize the kindergarten teachers, but to share some kind of professional knowledge. And I think this kind of connection, it's very, very important. It's very important for the primary teachers because in Portugal, they are completely alone. There are no kind of background, professional background to them. And for the kindergarten teacher, I think it's also very important because it's very important. This is the pedagogy and the pedagogical strategies when we talk about the first 10 years of the life of children. I think it's very important. So I think the movement must be the opposite that from the occurring the UK. And I think it's very important. We understand the primary school, it's also very important times in the life of children.
Thank you, Luís. I'm going to share. Michel van der Burg said that he's recently started an online discussion with civil servants and academics from Italy, France, the Netherlands, and Belgium on the problem of split systems and how to overcome these. So it might be a good idea to look at how we can join some forces in the future, which is, it's a really good idea in terms of a project to take forward, because if we're thinking about the different dimensions and also how we involve political voices in these discussions, we definitely need to start talking to each other and having these dialogues and trying to understand the system. So as Peter was saying in the beginning of his communication, how we can learn about what has been done, not with the objective of copying different systems and reproducing them, but with the objective of understanding what possibilities do we have with the realities within our own systems, and what does that mean to the workforce, and what's going to happen. And I understand from the comment here, Tullia, that you are part of that project. So perhaps you can share a little bit about that. Michel is suggesting.
Oh, yes, but I think that it's highly necessary to get in touch between European and even non-European countries to discuss this issue of a split system, because I think that, for instance, the question of a compulsory age risk to be a real terrific pandemic in the early childhood education all over Europe. Now, the French Minister of Education stated that at 3 should be compulsory. Our French colleagues say that it's done with scopes of control. of population, mostly foreign parents. In Italy, some labor unions begin to speak about it, and it's not for control. It's just for labor union revendication, because as the births are declining, they speculate that introducing compulsory for 10% of children that are not already in the Scuola dell'Infanzia means more places. But it can be catastrophic, I think, because there is no, if the provision of education is qualified, it appeals parents, it appeals families, and people, all the country understand what it means and the value of it. And so we see, for instance, also the demand. I spoke about the demand of 2 years of parents of 2 years old that do not find a place in the educational services for under 3, but they rush to Scuola dell'Infanzia. They know that it's needed for children. So the point is not to make new architectures of a system. The point is to make a qualified provision and unified, and to struggle for it, because it's not done.
Thank you, Tullia. I think that's really important. How can we reach that level of understanding, and how can we do that? So, Carmen, I believe you are here and you cannot see yourself, and we can't see you either. It seems that your camera is not working, but can you hear us?
I can hear you. I'm so sorry. I'm not entirely certain what happened, but it's lovely to join you. Good evening. It's morning here, 7 o'clock, 7:15.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Carmen. We can hear you very well. We were wondering, would you like to share something with us about New Zealand? We've had the whole discussion now, and we were now having a dialogue and answering some questions. So if you would like to share something, you could do it now.
I'm very happy to share things. I wonder whether you could start me off, since I've missed everything. What would you like to know? I'd be very happy to start where you'd like me to.
So it would be good to hear from you about what the system in New Zealand is looking like at this point in time when we think about the unification of 06. Do you have a split system? Do you have a unified system? And what sort of...
Good place to start. I can now see myself, so maybe we might be able to get a camera going.
Possibly soon. It's still not working yet, but it might show up.
Okay, good. Well, let's start from here. I mean, New Zealand has had one of the distinctive things about New Zealand and its early childhood system is that we've had an integrated early childhood sector. In other words, a sector that looks at early childhood as covering the 0 to 5 years age span. And our policy settings have been geared up to deal with that age group since 1986, when policy and administrative responsibility for early childhood moved from the Department of Social Welfare to Education. So we're integrated as an education provision. And that policy decision in 86 has had far-reaching consequences for the sector, for children, as for parents and, of course, also for the early childhood profession. So with the integration of policy, then we were able to integrate training for people who work in the field. So what we now have is teacher education's provision that prepares those who want to work with children aged 0 to 5. They follow the same program, teacher education program, together. Previously, we had separate training provision for kindergarten teachers, for childcare workers, as we used to call them. We no longer talk about early childcare workers. We talk about early childhood teachers, or kayako, which is the Maori, the indigenous Maori word for teachers. So since '86, we've integrated training, and we've had a curriculum, one of the first early childhood curriculums in the world, that was launched in 1996. And at this point in time, we have a highly professionalized early childhood workforce. So 72% of all people who work in early childhood services are trained at the benchmark level of a 3-year degree or diploma. So that means if you work with children 0 to 3, you have the same qualification background as if you work with older children, and you have the same professional status. So we have a teaching council that registers teachers who work across the sector from early childhood to secondary, and everyone who has a teacher education degree is registered or certificated now, is the term that we use. So that has been the case. It's sort of the taken for granted state of affairs for us. This is all, the early childhood sector is very diverse. So while we have the same training background, people work in settings that have very different philosophical orientations. We largely distinguish between licensed teacher-led services and licensed parent-led services. And both types of services cater for children 0 to 5 years. We go up to 5 years, and then while compulsory school starts at the age of 6, most children actually start at the age of 5. So that's a little bit of background on that. Home-based provision, in other words, family daycare, that's a growing part of the early childhood sector. There, our situation is that a family daycare home is linked with a network, and so the educators in the home don't have the same qualification backgrounds as a teacher in a center, but they work in a network that is led, facilitated by a trained, qualified teacher as well. So diversity is one of the characteristics of the sector in terms of philosophical orientation, but within that there is a commonality of teacher education. The other aspect I suppose one should talk about with the context in New Zealand is that it's a growing sector, at least until COVID. Now we've stabilized and in fact some centers are closing, but participation rates for children, particularly the youngest children, continue to grow until 2019, 2020. It's kind of stabilized now. So in terms of the role of government, because that was something that you said you would like to talk about. Government does not own early childhood services, but it is it provides all the funding and it regulates the sector. And we have a number of agencies involved in regulating the sector. So licensing is under the Ministry of Education. Then there's quality assurance by the Education Review Office. That's at the level of pedagogy. So the Education Review Office goes in to assure that all the regulations are being upheld, that ratios, everything that regulations cover are are functioning well. And then from the point of view of quality of teachers, we've got the teaching council that makes sure that there are professional standards that are followed, and that any complaints go to the teaching council. So that's the professional arm of quality assurance. And teaching qualifications, of course, come also under the oversight of the New Zealand Qualifications Authority. So while government does not own early childhood services, and this is something that now is coming again under discussion, should government own them? But until now, government has not owned these services. And in fact, the private part of the sector has grown incredibly significantly over the last 15 years or so. And with it has come the issue of are all early childhood teachers employed under the same conditions? Because when you have private provision, it's very hard to have the same conditions of work. And we're finding that that is a problem that is increasingly needing to be addressed. So at the moment, for example, the early childhood arm of the New Zealand Education Institute, which is the big teacher union. So teachers in early childhood belong to a bigger union that covers also primary school teachers. They're engaging with the issue of how can we ensure that all teachers with the same qualification backgrounds are working under the same employment conditions, because currently there are differences that have crept in that haven't been able to be checked by government agencies. So that's sort of, I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview of how the system works here.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Yes, it is very helpful. We still can't see you, so I've put your image so people can still see you whilst you're sharing with us. Yes,
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about that. I've got I'll just leave it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us the realities of New Zealand. Peter Moss made some references to New Zealand before in terms exactly of some of the points that you raised about the movement towards qualified workforce and what it means to have early years educators working under the same working conditions, and how important it is as a central part of a unified early childhood education system. One of the things we mentioned in this evening was that we need to start understanding what it means to be unified, and what does that mean for our discussions when we think about different systems and how fragmented interests sometimes interact within those systems, and how can we move towards a public education. So thank you for sharing the New Zealand reality, so we can think a little bit further about possibilities and other ways of thinking about early childhood education as well. So thank you for that. Would anyone like to say any final thoughts? We are reaching the end of our time, and I'm just wondering if there are any messages, any political insights that you think, if there is anyone watching out there, do we have a message for them? I'm just going to get, so I'll just let the panel think for a bit to see if there's any final thoughts.
Just to thank you, Diana, for this opportunity to share ideas, and the wish that we can continue it with an enlarged group of people from other countries, and Michel van der Burg just proposed. I think it will be very important at this moment. And it will be, Peter knows how it was important in the past to have this kind of connections. And I think in other ways than in the past, we should again try to stay connected.
Thank you, Tullia. I think that's definitely something we need to think about going forward, and how can we integrate policymakers, and perhaps think about a bigger event with that respect, and thinking about who can we include in the conversation as well. Who do we sit around the table? So today we had a round table to think about different realities in different countries, and perhaps we can start thinking about who can we include in this conversation going forward, and also to think about the different realities. Some of you mentioned the fact that we are talking about a very Eurocentric perspective, and now we have Carmen with us that showed us a slightly different perspective. But the reality is that there are many different countries with colonial legacies and with the past that also interacts with how early childhood education systems develop, and whether they are integrated or not, and what does that mean for education, because early childhood education can go beyond education, and we have many discussions about that as well. So thank you so much for joining this evening and this morning and this afternoon, because you're all in different parts of the world and at different times, and I really, really appreciate you being here and you sharing with us the realities. And I hope we can continue this conversation going forward, because we've learned so much from this process, and I'm very excited about what the future can bring when we start developing these dialogues with each other, with policymakers, with educators, with parents, with associations, so with everyone that can have a say and can actually look forward towards transformative change. So thank you very much to all of you for being here, and thank you for your contributions and for sharing your thoughts and realities. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, and my apologies for whatever went wrong with the system today. My apologies to you all.
Thank you so much for joining us so early in the day for you, Carmen. We really, really
I thought
appreciate you being here.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Good night.
Goodbye, and lovely to see you all. Tullia, Peter,